I never imagined I'd see a man in a fake HOA enforcer shirt pinned to the floor of my garage. By my wife, no less. But when he barged into our home demanding that we shut down her disruptive MMA training sessions, he quickly discovered the hard way that property rights and physics are very real things. The expression on his face when my athletic wife took him down? Absolutely priceless. But here's the thing. What if our security cameras hadn't caught his illegal entry? Would you know what to do if your HOA crossed a line? My name's Mike Thompson. I'm 45 years old and work remotely as a software developer from our home in Pinewood Estates. My wife, Jennifer, and I moved here 3 years ago after I secured a major contract developing security software for Fortune 500 companies. We settled into a beautiful 2-story colonial on a quarter-acre lot in what the realtor called the most desirable community in the county. We were drawn to the manicured streets, the sparkling community pool, and the sense of structure. The HOA fees seemed fair for what we were getting in return. Jennifer, now 42, has been my anchor for the past 15 years. Before we met, she was a professional mixed martial artist with an impressive 12-3 record. Today, she runs a small but thriving business teaching self-defense to women. When we bought this house, the spacious 3-car garage was a perfect fit, not just for our cars, but as a dedicated training space. We invested nearly $10,000 converting one section of the garage into a professional-grade studio. Padded floors, a curated selection of training gear, and proper soundproofing to minimize any disruption. Jennifer runs a tight ship. Only 6 private clients a week, most of them middle-aged women seeking confidence and practical skills in a safe setting. For the first 2 years, life in Pinewood Estates was idyllic. We paid our HOA dues on time, kept our yard in perfect shape, and even won yard a month last summer. Jennifer's sessions sometimes drew the curiosity of passing neighbors, many of whom later became clients. Then came the HOA board elections last November. That's when Gerald Wilson entered the picture. 40 years old, a mid-level manager at some downtown corporate office, he ran for HOA president on a platform of preserving community standards and protecting property values. He won by a narrow margin, mainly because only about 20% of homeowners even bothered to vote. Within weeks, the community newsletter shifted tone. What had once been cheerful updates about block parties and pool hours turned into stern warnings about infractions and fines. Gerald began making so-called compliance walks, clipboard in hand, documenting every petty violation he could find. The first time he came to our door, he wore a plastic smile and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood," as if we hadn't lived there for 2 years longer than he had. He seemed especially interested in Jennifer's business. "I hear you're running some kind of fight club out of your garage," he joked, his laugh lacking any real humor. Jennifer calmly explained that she ran a legal, licensed self-defense studio, had all the proper permits, and had even soundproofed the garage. Gerald's eyes scanned her frame with a look I didn't like. "Well," he said, "eye her up and down. I'll need to review those permits. The HOA has strict rules about home businesses." Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and unfortunately, that was just the beginning of what would become a long, frustrating nightmare. Less than a month later, we received our first official violation notice. Unsightly equipment visible through garage windows, in bold capital letters. It demanded that we keep the garage door closed at all times and install opaque coverings over the small windows. Jennifer called the HOA office. The secretary, who seemed sympathetic, told her, "Gerald insists this is a priority issue." Still trying to be cooperative, we installed blinds on the garage windows. But it didn't stop there. A week later came another notice. Unauthorized commercial activity. It referenced an obscure bylaw about businesses operating in residential zones. Jennifer pulled out her meticulously kept file, which included city permits and even written approval from the previous HOA board. We sent it all to Gerald. The next day, he showed up at our door, uninvited. "Those permits were issued under the previous administration," he said with a smug grin. "I'm reviewing all such exceptions." I noticed how his eyes kept lingering on Jennifer, how he stood just a little too close while talking to her. When she asked him, firmly but politely, to back up, his expression darkened. "Maybe we could talk this over dinner sometime," he said, completely ignoring that I was standing right there. "I'm sure we can come to some kind of arrangement about your little gym." Jennifer crossed her arms and said coolly, "I prefer to keep this professional, Mr. Wilson. My permits are in order." His entire demeanor changed. "We'll see about that," he snapped and stormed off. At the next HOA meeting, tensions were high. Gerald had added a new item to the agenda: review of home business regulations. When Gerald called for a discussion at the next HOA meeting, I stood up and asked the obvious: why was Jennifer's business suddenly a problem when other home-based operations had coexisted peacefully in our neighborhood for years? "Property values," Gerald replied smoothly. "Some activities are more disruptive than others." Jennifer raised her hand. "I'd like to know what specific complaints have been made about my business." Gerald shuffled through some papers. "The complaints are confidential, but rest assured they're significant." An older woman stood up from the back row. "I live next door to the Thompsons, and I've never heard a thing," she said firmly. "Their garage is better soundproof than my own house." Several others murmured in agreement. But Gerald quickly cut off the conversation and moved to the next agenda item. After the meeting, our neighbor Barbara approached us quietly. "Be careful with him," she warned. "Last summer at the pool opening, he wouldn't stop trying to talk to Jennifer while you were off getting drinks. When she brushed him off, he looked angry. I've seen that look before on my ex-husband. Just watch yourselves." The very next day, we noticed something new. A security camera had been installed at the community center, aimed directly at our driveway. Then the noise complaints started. First 1, then 3, then 7, all from anonymous sources, claiming Jennifer's training sessions were too loud. We weren't taking any chances. We bought a decibel meter and began logging the sound levels ourselves. All of them came in well below the city's legal limits. As a security software developer, I knew how to handle surveillance. So I set up our own system, multiple high-res cameras covering every angle of our property, footage backed up to a secure cloud server. But things escalated quickly. One of Jennifer's clients, a 50-year-old schoolteacher named Susan, found a note under her windshield wiper. "Your car will be towed next time." Shaken, she turned to Jennifer and said, "Maybe I should find another trainer." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just petty harassment anymore. Gerald wasn't enforcing community rules. He was targeting my wife, plain and simple, and I wasn't about to let that continue. We decided to fight back methodically. First, I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed every permit, every communication, and confirmed what we already suspected. "Your wife's business is completely legal and fully permitted," she said. "The HOA can't revoke prior approvals without valid cause. And the president doesn't like it isn't valid cause." Next, we scheduled an inspection with a city zoning official. He came out during one of Jennifer's training sessions, took decibel readings, verified permits, and looked over the studio setup. "You're not only in compliance," he told us, "you've gone above and beyond. I wish every home-based business were run this professionally." He even wrote an official letter affirming full compliance with all city regulations. With documentation in hand, we requested an emergency HOA board meeting. Gerald looked stunned when we walked in, flanked by our attorney, carrying the inspector's report and a petition signed by 27 neighbors in support of Jennifer's business. His face drained of color as our lawyer calmly dismantled every false claim. "Targeting a legally operating, properly permitted business with repeated harassment," she concluded, "could open the HOA and Mr. Wilson personally to serious liability." The other board members, clearly uncomfortable, voted unanimously to reaffirm Jennifer's right to operate her business. Outvoted and outmaneuvered, Gerald barely concealed his anger. "Fine," he muttered. "The business can continue. For now." We thought that would be the end of it. We were wrong. Within days, new anonymous complaints began rolling in, not about noise, but about traffic and safety. Jennifer's clients reported being photographed as they arrived. One found her car scratched after a session. The most disturbing moment came when Jennifer caught sight of someone peering through the garage window during a lesson. By the time she went outside, they were gone, but one of our cameras caught a blurry image of a man in a dark jacket hurrying away. "He's escalating," I told Jennifer that night. "I'm upgrading the security system first thing tomorrow." I installed additional cameras to cover every possible blind spot and configure motion-triggered alerts to our phones. As someone who builds these systems for a living, I made sure ours was bulletproof. High-definition footage, multiple backups, secure cloud storage. At the time, I didn't know how important that would turn out to be. Then came the Thursday in April. The weather had finally turned warm, and Jennifer had the garage door partially open for airflow while training Susan. Inside, the space looked more like a boutique gym than a garage. Black mats covering the floor, a punching bag in one corner, neatly arranged gear along the wall. I had stepped out briefly to pick up a specialized keyboard from a colleague across town when my phone buzzed. A motion alert. I opened the app. There he was, Gerald Wilson, striding purposefully toward our house. By his side was a younger man I recognized immediately, Dave Mercer, Gerald's new compliance officer, recently appointed. What made my blood run cold wasn't just seeing Gerald on the security feed. It was what he was wearing. A black polo shirt, bold white letters across the back. HOA Police. Dave wore a matching one. Both men carried clipboards and cameras slung around their necks like they were staging a neighborhood sting operation. I immediately tried calling Jennifer, but went straight to voicemail. She always silenced her phone during sessions. I fired off a warning text and hit the road, but I was still 15 minutes away. Meanwhile, according to Jennifer and Susan, and confirmed by our security footage, Gerald and Dave marched straight up to the garage. Gerald began pounding on the partially open door. "HOA inspection. Open up immediately," he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. Jennifer paused the session, confused but composed. "Susan, wait here a moment," she said calmly, walking toward the noise. Before she could fully reach the door, Gerald ducked under the partially raised panel and stepped into the garage like he owned the place. Dave followed close behind. "This is an official HOA compliance inspection," Gerald announced, puffing out his chest, a cheap metal badge gleaming on his polo. "We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized activities." Jennifer didn't flinch. "You need to leave. This is private property. You have no right to be here." Gerald's eyes scanned the room before locking on Susan. "Ma'am, are you aware you're participating in an illegal business operation?" he said gravely. "The HOA is considering legal action against anyone involved." Susan, visibly shaken, began to gather her things. Gerald's intimidation was working. "There's nothing illegal happening here," Jennifer replied firmly. "All our permits are in order. You know that. We discussed this last month." Gerald took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Those permits are under review," he sneered. "Until further notice, this business is suspended." "I'll call the police if you don't leave," Jennifer warned, stepping back. Dave moved to block her access to the door that led inside. "We have authority under Section 12 of the HOA Covenant," he claimed. "Not inside my home, you don't." Jennifer shot back. "Now get out." Gerald ignored her completely. He walked over to the training area and picked up one of her pads. "This equipment doesn't meet HOA aesthetic standards," he declared. "Put that down and leave," Jennifer said, her voice sharp. Instead, Gerald began collecting the equipment. These items would be held at the HOA office pending review. That's when Jennifer moved. "You're not taking anything from my home," she said, stepping forward. "Put that down. Now." Gerald turned, his face flushed with frustration. "This attitude is exactly the problem. People like you think the rules don't apply to them." Then, in one sudden motion, he grabbed Jennifer's arm. "This operation is shut down, effective immediately." Big mistake. It all happened in seconds. Jennifer's muscle memory from years of martial arts training kicked in. She executed a precise wrist control move, twisting free of Gerald's grip, while sweeping his leg in one fluid motion. Gerald was airborne for a split second, then slammed onto the training mat with a dull thud. "What the?" he gasped, the wind knocked out of him. Dave lunged, but Jennifer was already a step ahead. She sidestepped his clumsy charge, used his momentum against him, and had him in a controlled arm lock in seconds, forcing him to his knees beside Gerald. "Susan, call the police," Jennifer said, completely composed. "Tell them 2 men have entered our home illegally, and one of them just assaulted me." Gerald writhed on the mat. "You can't do this. We're HOA officials." "You're trespassers who force your way into my home," Jennifer replied. "That's a crime, not an HOA violation. And our cameras had caught it all. Every aggressive move, every word, every illegal action. They also caught something else." Gerald's expression. A mix of shock, rage, and dawning realization that he had just made a colossal mistake. "Let me go, you crazy woman," he shouted, squirming under Jennifer's expertly placed foot. His face was beet red, half from exertion, half from sheer embarrassment. "Stop moving or it'll hurt more," Jennifer said, calm as ever. "I'm not trying to injure you, just containing a threat until the police arrive." Dave had gone limp, clearly realizing the situation was in his favor. "Gerald, maybe we should just wait for the police," he mumbled. "Shut up," Gerald hissed. "She assaulted an HOA official. She's going to jail." Susan, clutching her phone, spoke from the corner. "The police are on their way," she said, her voice shaky. "They told me to stay on the line." Jennifer nodded. "Susan, can you check my phone? My husband probably called." Susan retrieved it from her gym bag and glanced at the screen. Several missed calls and a text. Says Gerald and Dave come in the house, wearing HOA police shirts. Jennifer adjusted her stance without easing her hold. "Did you hear that, Gerald? My husband saw you coming. He knows exactly what you're wearing and what you're doing." Gerald tried again to struggle. "This is assault," he barked. "I'll sue you for everything you have." Gerald spat. Jennifer didn't even flinch. "The security cameras caught everything," she said evenly, "including you grabbing me first. That's assault, Gerald. Entering my home without permission? That's breaking and entering. And wearing that shirt? That's impersonating law enforcement. We're not impersonating police." Dave protested. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "HOA police suggests you have legal authority, which you don't. That badge on your shirt? That makes it worse." Her tone stayed calm, but firm. "Now stay still. I don't want to adjust this hold unless I have to." For the next several minutes, the garage was silent save for Gerald's grunts and occasional half-hearted demands to be released. Jennifer remained completely composed, adjusting her grip only slightly to keep both men restrained without causing injury. I pulled up just as the first patrol car turned the corner and rolled to a stop in front of the house. 2 officers exited, hands cautiously near their belts as they scanned the area. "In here, officers," I called, rushing toward them. "My wife is restraining 2 men who broke into our garage and assaulted her." They followed me inside and froze for a moment, taking in the surreal scene. Jennifer calmly maintaining control of 2 grown men in matching HOA police shirts, and a wide-eyed Susan standing nearby like she'd just witnessed a home invasion, which, in truth, she had. "What's going on here?" the first officer asked. Jennifer looked up but didn't loosen her grip. "These men entered our home without permission. When I asked them to leave, this one," she gestured to Gerald, "grabbed my arm. I used reasonable force to defend myself and restrained them until you arrived." "She attacked us," Gerald shouted, scrambling for control of the narrative. "We were conducting an official HOA inspection." The second officer raised a skeptical brow. "Ma'am, can you release them so we can sort this out?" Jennifer nodded. "Of course, officer." She released both men and stepped back. Gerald stumbled to his feet and immediately pointed at her. "Arrest her. She assaulted HOA officials during an authorized inspection." The first officer didn't budge. "And what exactly were your duties?" he asked, eyeing Gerald's shirt like it was a Halloween costume. "We're from the HOA," Dave explained, rubbing his arm. "We got complaints about an illegal business operating here." I stepped forward. "Officers, we have everything on security footage. Every second of it. These 2 entered our property uninvited, harassed my wife and her client, and Gerald physically grabbed her when she told him to leave. "Let's see the footage," the first officer said. I pulled out my phone, opened our security app, and queued up the recording. Both officers watched silently as the event unfolded on screen. Gerald ducking into our garage uninvited, Dave following, Gerald grabbing Jennifer's arm in her calm, textbook self-defense. The second officer shook his head. "Those shirts are a problem," he muttered. "Impersonating law enforcement is a serious offense. We're not impersonating anyone." Gerald said quickly, "It just says HOA Police. It's just a title." "With a badge?" the officer asked, pointing to a shiny emblem on Gerald's chest that mimicked a real law enforcement badge. "You don't see the issue here?" Gerald's face paled. He finally seemed to realize he wasn't in control anymore. The officers separated everyone to take statements. I could see Gerald's confidence crumbling with each passing minute. He and Dave tried to maintain their story, that they'd announced themselves properly, were conducting a legitimate inspection, and had been attacked without cause. But their narrative unraveled quickly. The officers pointed out multiple contradictions in their accounts, especially after hearing Susan's version. She backed up everything Jennifer had said, how they barged in, made veiled threats, and how Gerald had grabbed Jennifer without provocation. Jennifer calmly walked the officers through her martial arts background and explained how she'd used only the force necessary to safely restrain them. Gerald tried one last time. "The HOA covenant gives us right of access for inspections," he said, flipping through a folder of paperwork. Officer Reynolds, the senior of the two, took the documents and read them carefully. "This says you can request access with notice, and only for exterior inspections of common violations," he said. "It doesn't say a thing about entering someone's garage or home, and it definitely doesn't say anything about grabbing residents," added Officer Chun. When Officer Reynolds asked about the shirts and the badges, Gerald tried to spin them as simple identification. "Just official uniforms for board members," he said. The officer shook his head. "Sir, anything that resembles a police uniform, especially when combined with forced entry and physical contact, creates a very serious situation." By then, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the patrol cars and rising tension. Barbara, our neighbor from next door, approached Officer Chun. "I've been watching that man harass this family for weeks," she said, pointing at Gerald. "He's been targeting them, and it's obvious." More neighbors chimed in. One by one, they shared stories of Gerald's increasingly erratic inspections, rule-pushing, and selective enforcement. The picture became unmistakably clear. As the officers wrapped up interviews, they pulled Gerald and Dave aside for a private conversation. When they returned, Officer Reynolds turned to Jennifer and me. "Based on the evidence and witness statements, we're placing both men under arrest for criminal trespass," he said. "Mr. Wilson is also being charged with simple assault for grabbing your arm. The district attorney will review the case for potential charges related to impersonating law enforcement." As the officers placed Gerald and Dave in handcuffs, Gerald's face twisted in stunned disbelief. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president." "Being HOA president doesn't put you above the law, sir," Officer Reynolds replied calmly. "You can't enter someone's home without permission, and you definitely can't put your hands on them." As they led Gerald to the police cruiser, he looked back at us, his face dark with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. But for the neighbors watching from their driveways, it was over. The spell Gerald had cast over the community, of fear, silence, and compliance, had finally been broken. Once the police cars disappeared down the street, a small wave of neighbors crossed their lawns to approach us, offering support and relief in equal measure. "I can't believe someone finally stood up to him," said Tom from across the street. "The way he's been running things, it's like we've been living under a dictator." Susan, who had stayed to give her statement, looked at Jennifer with wide eyes. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. You were so calm through all of it." Jennifer gave a modest smile. "Self-defense isn't just about knowing how to fight. It's about staying calm and using only the force necessary to protect yourself." What we didn't realize at the time was that this was only the beginning of an awakening, a reckoning. In the days that followed Gerald's arrest, something changed in the neighborhood. A collective unburdening began to ripple through the community. It started with phone calls and emails, neighbors we barely knew reaching out to share their own stories of intimidation and harassment. Megan Collins, the HOA's vice president, called an emergency board meeting. Before it began, she called me directly. I had no idea how bad things had gotten, she admitted. Gerald insisted on handling all compliance matters himself. He locked down communications, said it was more efficient that way. At the emergency meeting, Megan revealed that she had finally gained access to Gerald's private HOA files. And what she found was disturbing. Gerald had compiled a watch list, not just a list of violations, but a dossier of targeted homeowners, people who had opposed him, challenged his authority, or simply annoyed him. Jennifer and I were at the very top, with pages of notes detailing our daily routines, the names of visitors, and so-called infractions. Other families, nearly 20 of them, were listed with notes like potential removal candidate and apply maximum pressure. Gerald hadn't just abused his position. He had weaponized it. Then the revelations became more personal and more chilling. Alice, the HOA secretary, finally broke her silence. He made me file false complaints, she confessed, eyes welling with tears. He would dictate letters from concerned neighbors about violations that never happened. And when I questioned him, he threatened to fire me from my job at his real estate office. Another homeowner, Bill Parker, came forward. He fined me $2,500 for an unapproved fence, Bill said. When I showed him the signed approval, he said it had been revoked and I had to pay or face legal action. I paid. I couldn't afford to fight him in court. The stories kept coming. Security camera footage surfaced from multiple homes. Gerald entering backyards, peering through windows, even trying doorknobs while residents were away. One neighbor caught him on camera, attempting to open a side door in broad daylight. Then came the most damning piece of evidence. In a bid for leniency, Dave Mercer voluntarily gave police access to Gerald's email account. What they found painted a picture of a man whose obsession with Jennifer went far beyond any HOA dispute. He told me he needed photos for documentation, Dave said, visibly shaken. But there were hundreds. Pictures of your wife checking the mail, working out in the garage, walking the dog. None of it had anything to do with violations. When police executed a search warrant on Gerald's home computer, they discovered a document titled Neighborhood Improvement Plan. It wasn't about landscaping or zoning. Updates. It was a manifesto for harassment, targeted residents, methods of intimidation, selective enforcement tactics, and what he called pressure campaigns to force homeowners to move. But the most disturbing discovery for me was a digital folder titled simply Jennifer. It contained detailed surveillance notes, photos, and an obsessive log of her daily movements. Tucked among the files was a paragraph that chilled me to my core. Gerald's written account of how Jennifer had publicly embarrassed him by politely declining a dinner invitation at last year's pool opening. From that moment forward, he had slowly escalated his vendetta. What we had thought was a petty power trip, an overzealous HOA president on a power high, was something far more sinister. It was stalking, harassment, abuse masquerading as community governance. When the full extent of Gerald's actions came to light, the neighborhood's shock gave way to fury. Homeowners began comparing notes, digging out years of fines, revoked approvals, intimidation letters. One by one, the stories formed a mosaic of coercion and control, but the tide had turned. The community was no longer afraid of Gerald. He had built his kingdom on fear, and it had just crumbled. The more stories came to light, the more one question echoed through Pinewood Estates. How had this been allowed to happen? The criminal case against Gerald moved swiftly. In addition to the original charges, criminal trespass and assault, the district attorney added stalking, official oppression, and attempted breaking and entering, based on evidence from multiple homeowners. Dave Mercer accepted a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation, receiving probation for his role. Gerald, however, refused all plea offers, claiming he was merely enforcing the rules and was fully authorized by the HOA covenant. The preliminary hearing was packed, standing room only, as neighbors came to witness what many hoped would be the beginning of accountability. The judge appeared visibly disturbed by the HOA police shirts and replica badges. "In 20 years on the bench," she said, I've seen many HOA disputes, but never one where a board member impersonated law enforcement to intimidate residents. Gerald's lawyer argued the uniforms were just for identification. That defense collapsed when the prosecution produced Gerald's credit card records showing he'd purchased the shirts, badges, and a tactical flashlight from a site called authorityuniforms.com. On the civil side, 17 families, including us, filed a class action lawsuit against Gerald personally and the HOA for negligent oversight. Our lawyer filed our case separately due to the severity of the stalking evidence. Initially, the HOA's insurance tried to defend Gerald, but when they reviewed the evidence, they invoked their intentional acts exclusion, leaving Gerald to cover his own legal costs. After Gerald's criminal conviction on all counts and a 2-year prison sentence, his attorney approached us about a settlement. The final agreement included a substantial monetary payment, a permanent restraining order, and a public written apology. But the most satisfying moment came at sentencing when the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Wilson, you abuse your limited authority to harass and intimidate your neighbors. You violated the sanctity of their homes and their sense of safety. But perhaps most troubling is your refusal to accept that your behavior was wrong. You still claim your position gave you the right to enter homes, to touch residents, and to stalk a woman who simply rejected your advances. This court is sending a clear message today. What you did was not just inappropriate, it was criminal." As Gerald was let out in handcuffs, many in the courtroom, our neighbors, applauded. For our community, it was the end of a long nightmare. But in many ways, it was just the beginning. That weekend, Pinewood Estates held its most attended HOA meeting in history. Over 90% of homeowners showed up. The vote was unanimous. The remaining board members who enabled Gerald's behavior were removed. In their place, a new board was elected, one committed to transparency and reform. To my surprise, several neighbors nominated me for a board position. We need someone who knows the difference between reasonable rules and a power trip. Barbara said in her nomination speech, "Our first order of business was passing what we now call the Homeowner Protection Amendment. Asian notices must include photographic evidence and reference the specific rule. Inspections must be recorded on body cameras. Any fine over $100 requires review by a neutral committee of non-board homeowners. All financial records must be posted online for public review." Jennifer, meanwhile, turned her ordeal into purpose. She offered a free self-defense workshop for women in the neighborhood. The turnout was so overwhelming she had to schedule 3 more sessions. "It's not just about kicks and holds," she told the group. "It's about knowing when someone is trying to intimidate you and knowing your rights." Our story drew broader attention. A local news station aired a feature titled, "HOA Overreach, When Community Rules Become Tyranny." They interviewed us and aired the security footage of Gerald's unlawful entry. The video became a powerful symbol and a warning to other communities. Soon, people from across the city reached out for advice. I found myself speaking at town halls and HOA reform meetings, sharing our story and encouraging change. But the most meaningful change happened right at home. Our quiet, rule-fearing neighborhood transformed. People who had once skipped meetings out of fear started attending and speaking up. Block parties returned. Strangers became neighbors. And as one elderly resident told me at our first community barbecue, "For years, I was afraid to put a garden gnome in my yard because I might get fined. Now, I finally feel like I can live in my own home again." The fear Gerald used to control us was gone, replaced by a shared sense of dignity and mutual respect. And here's what I've learned. Your rights don't end at your driveway. Not in this country. Not in any community. HOA rules may govern paint colors and fence heights, but they do not override basic property rights and personal dignity. And when someone abuses their power, whether they wear a suit, a uniform, or a shirt that says HOA Police, you have the right and the responsibility to stand up. Jennifer's studio now has a waiting list, not just for martial arts, but for something bigger, empowerment. She's teaching women that self-defense isn't just physical. It's the courage to say no, to say, "Leno board member may enter any private property without written permission and 24-hour notice. All violate." To say, "You're not allowed to treat me this way." So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, even if they come with clipboards, rule books, and fake badges. And if you're ever tempted to wear a shirt that says HOA Police, just remember the image of Gerald, face down on our garage floor, learning about property rights the hard way.